The film opens with two very different men. Riche, the flight captain, is the type who still croons, "Fly me to the moon" at karaoke bars, charming a room full of strangers like the world hasn't caught up with him yet. Ben, his first officer, is the opposite. We find him swimming laps alone, clearly carrying some private weight. When he calls his wife afterward, he tells her the flight schedule changed and he's not sure when he'll be home. That's a lie. Ben has actually talked his manager into giving him tomorrow's flight, just so he doesn't have to go home. The real reason comes out fast. His son is sick and Ben can barely stand to watch him suffer through treatment. Flying is how he's been running from it. Outside the terminal, a passenger named Dan is smoking against airport rules, and when a staff member calls him out, he's rude enough that you immediately clock him as trouble. His tablet is dying, so he grabs a power bank to charge it, except the cable is damaged and sparking. Dan doesn't care. He shoves it into his bag anyway. When a security officer asks if he's carrying any batteries or power banks, Dan lies and says no. The screener isn't paying attention, the bag sails through, and workers load it straight into cargo. Meanwhile, Ben and Rich arrive at the airport. On the way in, Ben meets a young girl named Cora, who's clearly terrified of flying. He sits with her, talking her down, and learns the real problem isn't the plane at all. It's that her father remarried, and Cora resents her new stepbrother Finn. Her stepmother, Jaya, Jyu, is trying to bridge that gap. She's even hidden a tracking device in Finn's clothes and installed a tracking app on Cora's phone, just so she can keep tabs on him during the flight. We're then introduced to a Chinese esports team and an American college sports team, also boarding. One of the American guys, Hutch, starts hitting on a girl from the esports team named Lily. Her teammate Sam steps in to defend her, and the tension nearly turns into a fist fight, until their coach, Coach Dade, arrives just in time to break it up. Everyone boards. The pilots run through their pre-flight checks, flight attendants seat the passengers, and among them is an elderly woman named Becky, sitting beside a younger man named Matt. Becky tells him all about a granddaughter she hasn't seen in years. As the sun sets, the plane lifts off the runway and climbs into the evening sky. In the air, Rich and Ben confirm every safety protocol has been followed. Later that night, Rich steps out of the cockpit to rest. Meanwhile, Declan, Cora's father, and Jaya slip off to the restroom together. When Finn notices they're missing, Cora tells him they've gone to the bathroom, but he goes looking for them anyway. Along the way, he runs into Matt, who's playing a game on his tablet, and the two bond instantly over it. That's when Dan's damaged power bank ignites inside the cargo hold. Smoke detectors trigger the alarm, and the pilots scramble to activate the plane's fire suppression system. But it isn't enough to contain the blaze. They radio for help and are told to divert to the nearest airport, which is still nearly half an hour away. Ben sends crew members down to the cargo hold with extinguishers, but the fire has already spread too far. The situation spirals fast. An explosion rips through the fuselage, sending fire extinguisher canisters flying and tearing a hole straight through the plane's body. Declan and Jaya are killed instantly in the chaos. Lily grabs Cora and shields her. The pilots fight for control, but debris rips into one engine, destroying it, and moments later the second engine fails too. Every system on board starts dying with. Rich turns to Ben with one option left: dump the fuel to lighten the plane because he's taking them down into the ocean. He tells the passengers over the intercom to brace for impact. Somehow, Rich manages to bring the plane down onto the water in one piece. But the relief doesn't last. The fuselage skids straight into a coral reef and breaks apart violently, splitting into 3 separate sections. In the cockpit, Ben tries to wake Rich, who tells him the landing worked. It was the reef that tore them apart. Penny, a flight attendant, arrives with Cora just as the windshield starts buckling under the water pressure outside. They realize Rich is pinned, trapped between his seat and the control panel, and there's no way to free him without amputating his leg. Rich refuses. He knows he'd bleed out anyway, and there's no time left before the glass gives way. He orders the others to save themselves and get out before they all drown. They obey, sealing the cockpit door behind them, while Rich looks at a photo of his family one last time. The windshield shatters and the cockpit floods completely. Ben surfaces to find the wreckage floating across the reef. Most of the passengers in his section survived, including Dan, Hutch, Jesse, and Coach Dade. But Lily is missing. Sam panics, calling out for her. Underwater, Lily is fighting to reach the surface when something grabs her leg. She breaks free and pulls herself onto a piece of wreckage, only to realize she's been bitten by a shark. In the rear section of the plane, which is sinking nose down into the reef, flight attendant Zoe and elderly Becky are trapped along with Matt and Finn. Matt tries to open an exit hatch, but Zoe stops him, warning that it will flood the whole compartment. Watching the destruction outside, Ben realizes their only real hope is retrieving a rescue locator beacon from the plane's midsection before help can find them. Penny volunteers instead since she's a strong swimmer and dives into the water. As Penny swims through the debris, Ben and Cora spot a body being dragged under the surface, a clear sign that sharks are circling. They scream to warn Penny, but she thinks they're just cheering her on. Before she can react, a shark pulls her under and kills her in front of everyone. Ben and Cora scramble into an inflatable raft and paddle out, fighting the same shark off with an oar before it can capsize them. Elsewhere, part of the wreckage starts tilting as the reef beneath it collapses, throwing more passengers into the water. Ben proposes redistributing everyone's weight to keep their section balanced, but Hutch mocks the idea and starts a fight with Sam. Passengers pull them apart, and to Sam's surprise, Jesse and Coach Dade side with him, moving everyone toward the plane's midsection for stability. Meanwhile, Lily realizes her section of wreckage is sinking and swims toward the middle section, where she's reunited with Sam. Their relief is cut short when the sharks return and kill Coach Dade in front of everyone. And when Jesse tries to save him, the sharks take him too. The deaths send Hutch into a rage. He blames Sam for both losses and tries to throw him into the water for the sharks, but Ben arrives just in time to restrain him. Back in the rear section, oxygen is running low and water is rising fast. Matt decides to dive out and swim for help. He manages to reach the surface where he finds Cora's father, Declan, somehow still alive. But before they can speak, a shark kills Declan right in front of him, and Matt is left screaming for help. In the midsection, Dan is blaming Ben and the airline for the disaster, with no idea that his own power bank started the fire. Ben tries to keep everyone calm and organized, telling them their best shot at survival is retrieving the locator beacon, launching the life rafts, and getting everyone into life vests. The plan works. Ben finds and activates the beacon, but he's horrified to discover Cora isn't with the others. She's wandered back toward her old seat, searching for her family, completely unaware a shark is closing in on her. Ben hands off the beacon to Dan and sprints after her, saving her at the last second. In the panic, several passengers fall into the water. Dan, meanwhile, throws the locator beacon into the ocean just so he can scramble onto a raft to save himself. Ben manages to pull Cora to safety, but he's stunned when he realizes what Dan has done. Their best chance at rescue is now gone, and Dan shows no remorse, still shouting that Ben and the airline are the ones to blame. Ben holds his temper and simply keeps Dan away from the other raft, refusing to let him cause any more damage. Elsewhere, Sam finds himself drifting from the raft and grabs a floating bag of clothes to stay afloat. He spots an unconscious Hutch nearby and pulls him to safety before signaling for the others. Ben rows over, but a group of sharks suddenly surrounds them. Sam holds perfectly still with Hutch in his arms until Ben reaches them and pulls them both out just in time. Back in the tail section, which is now fully submerged, Zoe realizes it's time to move. She teaches Finn how to use his life vest to rise safely to the surface, but Becky refuses to go with them. She knows her body won't survive the swim, and she doesn't want to slow them down. They say their goodbyes, and Zoe and Finn dive down and swim through the wreckage. Becky, alone, records one last video message on her phone for the granddaughter she never got to see again. As Zoe and Finn swim up, they pass Matt's lifeless body, killed by the same sharks that took Declan. They surface and find an empty life raft waiting, and Zoe helps Finn climb in. But the motion draws the sharks' attention, and Zoe is pulled under. She barely manages to fight them off and claws her way back onto the raft, tying off her bleeding leg before passing out from exhaustion. Finn tries to wake her, and moments later the raft is struck again, throwing him into the water. What happens to him after that is left unclear. Far off, Ben and the others spot a passing plane overhead. They wave and scream, but it flies on without noticing them, leaving everyone unsure if they were ever seen at all. That night, a Chinese fishing trawler receives word from rescue services that a plane has gone down nearby and is asked to search for survivors until a rescue aircraft can arrive. Around the same time, Hutch thanks Sam for saving his life, and, noticing Sam's feelings for Lily, encourages him to finally tell her how he feels. Cora, grieving her father, tells Ben how much it hurt that he left her behind, and that she couldn't keep her promise to look after Finn. Ben reassures her that none of it was her fault. Then, a rescue helicopter finally reaches them. A rescue swimmer drops into the water to help the survivors board, but the crew ignores Ben's frantic warnings not to send him down. The sharks attack almost immediately, tearing into his leg before a massive shark drags him under by the safety line, pulling the helicopter itself off balance. It crashes into the ocean and explodes, throwing everyone back into the chaos of the water. Somehow, the survivors regroup and scramble back onto the rafts. Moments later, they spot the fishing trawler approaching. Ben fires a flare to get their attention, but the boat holds its distance. The surrounding reef is too dangerous for it to get closer. Realizing they'll have to close the gap themselves, Ben tells everyone to paddle toward the trawler, only to discover all their oars have been lost in the water. That's when Ben notices Cora isn't with them. She slipped away, standing alone on a piece of wreckage in the distance, the same place her father died. Without hesitation, Ben dives in and swims to her. She's in shock, telling him she wants to stay there with her father. Ben talks her down gently, convincing her to put on a life vest. He removes his own belt, ties it around her, and has her hold onto his back as he swims them both toward the raft. Sharks close in around them, and Ben fires his flare gun directly into one to keep them at bay. Watching through his binoculars, the trawler's captain sees what's happening and orders his crew to dump their fresh catch overboard. The sharks are instantly drawn to the fish, giving Ben and Cora the opening they need to reach the raft safely. Nearby, Dan spots his own cigarettes floating on the surface and reaches out to grab them, thrilled, until a shark rises up and kills him before he can even celebrate. The next morning, all the survivors are safely aboard the trawler, heading toward the nearest port. Sam finally works up the courage to tell Lily how he feels, and she admits she feels the same way. Standing at the bow, Ben finds Cora by herself and gently encourages her to grieve, but also to keep living. That's when passengers' phones start picking up signal again. Cora grabs Ben's phone, opens the tracking app her stepmother installed, and manages to locate Finn's position. The trawler changes course toward it. When they arrive, they find flight attendant Zoe alone on the raft, alive, but Finn is nowhere to be seen. It turns out Zoe had hidden him beneath a pile of life vests to keep him safe. The moment Cora sees him, she pulls him into her arms and breaks down in tears. Watching all of this, Ben looks at a photo of his own sick son and realizes something about himself. He'd been hiding in his work, using flights as an excuse to avoid facing his son's illness. After everything he's just survived, he understands that running away was never the answer, and that his wife and son need him there with them. He calls his wife, tells her he's finally coming home, and promises his son he isn't going anywhere ever again. Deep Water throws a plane crash and a shark attack into the same disaster movie and somehow keeps both threats coming right up until the very end. If you want more breakdowns like this one, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never